Yeah, that's a really good question because when I tell you what I really do, you're going to think like, that's crazy.
Hello, and welcome to Biofilm Podcast, a show that brings you to the forefront of biomedical research, biotech, pharma, and healthcare fields, and the professionals behind it. I'm your host, Pavel Ryzhov. On this episode of Biofilm Podcast, I welcome a fellow PhD graduate from Sanford Burnham Prebys Medical Discovery Institute, Marisa Sanchez. She graduated in 2019 and since then started working in Reveal Biosciences, a San Diego-based biotechnology company which specializes in computational pathology. Today, we're going to explore her scientific journey, transition from academia to industry, and find out how she managed to climb a mountain of various professional and personal challenges. Oh, and Mount Everest. Welcome to the podcast, Marisa.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So before we jump into a conversation about your journey, I like to have this recurrent segment on my podcast where I ask my guests about their favorite movie or TV show that they have recently watched or rewatched. And now it's, fitting. It's a bit fitting because we have a bit of time on our hands.
Yeah, that's a good question. Friends is always my favorite number one go-to. I like to have it on the background and definitely have been rewatching that many times now.
Yeah.
But I also recently started watching Ozark, which I've heard a lot of other people have been watching too. So,
can you tell us a little bit about that? Is that a TV show or a movie?
It's on Netflix. It's
okay.
on Netflix. Yeah.
Yeah. As long as it's not Tiger King, I'm okay.
I already did that one.
Okay. So if your favorite show is Friends, are you going to subscribe to HBO Max now? Because I think it's going to go from Netflix.
I might have to. Might have to. That's where my loyalty is to Friends.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think a lot of people will probably have to do that at some point because HBO Max will just steal the Friends away from Netflix. And I think Office is going to be gone too at some point too.
So then why have Netflix?
Yeah, I think it's a good time to actually start earning money to subscribe to all these different services. So I think in the same way that you have also graduated as VP, and truth be told, we haven't had a chance to talk too much while we were there, and I feel that's partially my fault. I've been a bit socially awkward, and I'm trying to mitigate that by doing this channel, for example. So with that in mind, my question to you, in which way do you think you've grown? What was the point of biggest growth that you had on the personal level that you had to face during your PhD?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. I think going into my PhD, I had some idea of how hard it would be. I knew it was going to be, really challenging and force me to kind of do things that I wasn't used to doing. But I think one of the biggest things that helped me grow through that process was accepting failure and learning from failure and realizing that it's okay to fail and no data is still data. So it's, I think, accepting kind of those mountains and molehills that come your way and just realizing that that life, much like a PhD program, is like a roller coaster. There's always going to be downs, but then there's always ups. So I think I really learned to kind of grow from my mistakes and my failures. And that's something that, you can carry over in life.
For sure. I experienced my fair share of failures too. And I think I really had a hard time experiencing and sort of overcoming the failures, but specifically maybe from the point of view of I didn't see that the progress that I've been making was actually meaningful. So can you elaborate a little bit in terms of what were your actual, what were your thoughts going through in terms of okay, this experiment failed, and then you had a number of successful experiments just failing out of nowhere. How did you really overcome this? What was your mental state going in?
Of course, because that definitely happened all the time. Let me tell you.
Exactly. Yes.
I think, in the beginning, especially going into it, I feel like everyone experiences some sort of imposter syndrome. So you kind of feel like your experiment's going wrong or, not getting a paper accepted or something as a reflection of your own talents and your own intelligence, when it's really not. There's a lot of things you can control and there's a lot of things you just can't sometimes. And I think for me, it was really understanding that, I I needed to overcome that kind of imposter syndrome and that mindset. And it just took some time. Like in the beginning, the first 2 years, I definitely kind of took all of those mistakes as a reflection of myself when I really shouldn't. And I really did, belong to where I was. And I did deserve the success that came after it.
Absolutely.
So it was mainly just kind of overcoming that mindset of everything, all of your failures are a reflection of yourself when it's really not. They're meant to kind of help you grow, and it just took time.
For sure. So I think you also had some time working in a laboratory before you started your PhD, and you've done it, I think, for a number of years. So how did that laboratory experience change between the before and during the PhD? What was the main biggest challenge that you faced? Because I think, working in the laboratory can be very different if you don't have your own maybe like project to carry over, right?
Sure. Yeah. So when I began working in a lab in my undergrad at UCSD, so I had a little bit of experience there, but that was mainly just kind of monotonous technician work. And then when I graduated UCSD, I worked at the La Jolla Institute for Immunology. And I worked there for 2 years in a virology lab, and that was a really great experience because it was an academic lab. I really got exposed to hard science, and it was really fascinating. And I think transitioning from that, I was a lab manager there. I kind of ran the everyday operations, but then worked on a bunch of different experiments for different projects. So I was kind of all over the place. And then coming into a PhD program, I really had to narrow down my focus and then become an independent scientist. And I think that was the main kind of difference. Is I was dependent on a lot of other people working in the lab before, and then moving into a PhD program, I really had to rely on myself. And of course, my mentor was there to, supervise and help. But it was really expected that you were to become an independent thinker and an independent scientist, and getting kind of thrusted into that was very shocking at first. So, but that's how you learn, right? You just kind of sink or swim.
So if you were doing virology or working in that area in your undergrad, and then you went into the protein translation laboratory, essentially, which are two different things, and we're going to talk a little bit later about what fascinates you about that, but what was the logic behind you applying to SBP versus UCSD or some other places? Like, what were you looking for from your PhD experience?
Yeah, so I did apply to a lot of different places. So I applied to, big universities, obviously UCSD as well. But what really struck me a lot, I also applied to a lot of small programs like Cedars-Sinai. There's programs pretty small. And I think what really struck me about those programs was that they were very focused, and they were very hands-on. And I just felt like I could get more out of that experience than if I was just a number at a university and just had to sit in on exams all the time. I just didn't feel like that was the right experience for me. I felt like I kind of needed more of a kind of all-inclusive collaborative environment. And that's pretty much exactly what SBP offered. I'm sure like it's very easy to collaborate, and you could literally talk to any of the deans at any time. And I think that was a really valuable thing that program offered, and the ability to really start your project and not have to do a year or two of rotations.
Absolutely, yeah.
That was very appealing.
Yeah,
and I was kind of lucky that I got placed in the lab that I did, and was able to start, working on my projects right away. So.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of saving time with rotations, I completely agree. And this is one of the, I think, very, I guess, unique features about SBP. I know other places also try and avoid doing rotations. But one bigger thing about SBP that I really like is you can always find parking. So I think that saves you so much time. So that's like, it cannot be overstated. When you look for parking every day, I think you could graduate by one year, longer than otherwise, right?
Keep your sanity, that's for sure.
Yes. So now that you're in the PhD program, you're doing protein translation, and this is a very fascinating corner of cell biology. And having had a tutorial with your mentor, Professor Dieter Wolf, I just really was struck by the complexity of like all those different proteins that go into regulating this process. So what was the most exciting part for you when you started, and how did it really change and evolve over time by the time you graduated? What was the thing that you wish you actually had a chance to do a little bit more research on?
That's a good question. So I think going into it, I think I was just like awestruck and a little bit overwhelmed at how much protein translation and all of these signal transduction pathways involved in so many aspects of protein synthesis and regulation were involved in everything. That it was almost like I was given this huge umbrella of a topic to look at, and I could go kind of anywhere with it. But our lab at the time was a cancer biology lab, and I knew I wanted to go into cancer biology, and obviously signals transduction and protein regulation is a huge thing in cancer biology. So I think going down that path was really the most interesting to me. Mm-hmm. And I did branch off and study, different kind of fundamental mechanisms, but then I got to, do some deep diving into cancer biology as well, and be on some really interesting studies and projects and papers and everything. So I think the complexity of protein translation, or mRNA translation, I should say, is just, pretty ubiquitous in a lot of cellular processes. And it's fascinating in that aspect that even, in virology and viral replication, you'll see the same pathways that you see in cancer biology or in, just epithelial growth pathways, things like that. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much what hooked me into kind of that lab and wanting to continue with that.
Yeah. So in terms of the protein translation, as you say, it's very pervasive, if you will, in terms of so many different avenues for further exploration in terms of research. What were maybe some of the things that you wanted to address that you didn't have a chance to study, like in your maybe final few months of working in the lab? Like, what are your like one last experiment that you wanted to do?
Yeah, so it was always the goal to do a proof of principle in a cancer model for some of the factors that I was looking at, and it wasn't necessary for my project or my paper, but it would have been nice to kind of have a proof of principle study and I think we were looking at breast cancer xenografts at the time, so mm-hmm. something like that would have been like the cherry on top. But yeah. I was also ready to be done. So
yeah. No, I completely understand. And speaking of being ready to be done, what were your thoughts in the final few months of your PhD? What was the sort of the trajectory that you wanted to set for yourself after you graduate, and how did it ultimately lead into the position that you're in? I think this is a very crucial point for a lot of PhD students. I mean, I'm sort of in the middle of that too, like finding yourself beyond what defines yourself as a PhD student. What was going on through your mind at that time?
Oh, it's such a weird mindset to have, because for, the last 4+ years, you're kind of so honed in on one thing, and then you have to imagine life after that. And it's almost like that doesn't even exist because you've been doing this for so long. So it was really hard to kind of like get past that and realize that I'm going to have a job at a certain point, but I think what really helped me was really setting goals for myself. And I think I got to a point in the last few months where all I was doing was writing my thesis, maybe a few experiments here and there, but I was pretty much just writing. And I would just make sure, like, okay, every day I have to write a certain amount or get to a certain point. But at the same time, I was applying for jobs in tandem. Mm-hmm. So I was, doing my research on different jobs that I was interested in. I was trying to network and kind of applying for a job and finding a job is also like a job in itself.
So I completely agree. Yeah. Yes, definitely.
It was a tough balance. And I will say I didn't make a lot of progress in that while I was writing my thesis, because that was always my priority.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
I think so I ended up graduating in May. I started applying for jobs in February. But I don't think I really made any real progress until after I graduated.
Mm-hmm.
So it was good for me to start looking beforehand to see what was out there and wrap my head around the idea of what did I really see myself doing
Mm-hmm.
after, my PhD. And I kind of just had to do a lot of self-reflection on, okay, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Every job application I saw or job description, I had to really imagine myself, would I do this? Do I want to be a bench scientist running, assays all day? I don't
Yeah.
know. I think I have more strengths than that in other areas. So
Mm-hmm.
it was really a matter of going through tons of job descriptions and really just kind of being realistic and being honest with yourself. Like, do you really want to do this, or are you just desperate for a job right
Yes,
now?
yes, yes. So
So
what is your number one strength that you found that was beyond just being a bench scientist? That was like, okay, that's why I don't want to do this anymore.
yeah, so it was, I've always loved doing bench work. I've always loved the hands-on doing experiments, but I always kind of felt like maybe that wasn't my number one strength. I definitely realized over time that I think maybe my communication skills and were a little bit more valuable. Like a bench scientist might not need as much of communication skills as maybe someone that was more in the field or someone that was working more hands-on with people. And I kind of realized through the last few years of my PhD being vice president and president of the graduate student class
Mm-hmm.
body that I really enjoyed working with people. I really enjoyed being a leader in that sense. And so I was kind of looking for more jobs that encompassed more communication skills, but also needed that scientific background that rooted in like deep hard science.
Yeah. So with that in mind, you've been going, how many job applications did you end up applying for?
Oof. Um,
Rough estimate.
less than 100,
Wow.
more than maybe not quite 50, maybe up there towards 50, but
Okay. Okay.
um,
Wow.
a good amount. And maybe a lot of them were probably just like, oh, this is easy, I can just submit my resume, and I didn't
Yeah.
even think twice about it. But the
Yeah.
ones that I really were um, focused on were the ones that I was kind of like, this sounds like something I really want to do. I'm gonna like really work hard, make this like, a really good resume or
Yeah.
cover letter.
Definitely. So now you're an application scientist with Reveal Biosciences. And obviously, application scientist can mean a lot of different things depending on the company and product or service that you're involved with. So can you elaborate a little bit on what is it that you're doing at Reveal Biosciences now?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because when I tell you what I really do, you're going to think like, that's crazy. So Reveal Biosciences is a relatively small biotech startup company. We've been around since 2012, and there's about 35 employees now. So not a huge company, but also not a fresh startup company, which is such a great environment. I really love the biotech kind of startup vibe. And we're very well established in San Diego and all over the company. But what I do as an application scientist, I'm the only application scientist within the company, and I work with pretty much all of the teams. I work with the executive leaders to come up with ideas for how to implement certain products. I work with the commercial team and marketing to help with scientific materials like brochures and our website. And I work with the lab team mostly to manage projects within our pipeline. And I mostly also work with clients. So I'm pretty much the main client-facing contact, that when we get an inquiry or someone wants to come and do a study with us, I'm the one that will design the study. I will work with the clients to figure out what their study goals are, and I'll put together the project for them, plan out the pricing for them, and then work with them to kind of get the study started. And then I'll run it through our lab team, see it through our whole pipeline, and work on their reports at the end. And so I pretty much
The
see a
list goes on.
beginning to end. I do a lot. So
Yeah,
a little bit of everything. I wear a lot of different hats, and it's really awesome though. I write articles for the website. I made a poster. We were supposed to present at AACR this year. So I did a poster for that. And so I still get, some of that academic work in, which is fun.
Yeah,
But
as a science communicator myself, I want to say I'm definitely jealous of what you're doing. That sounds like an awesome job.
I have to say I am enjoying it a lot. So
Fantastic.
don't worry,
Fantastic.
there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes, yeah, because science communication is something that we obviously as PhDs have some training in, and some of us even have passion in doing that. And definitely when I get to hear someone like you, which exactly does this scientific communication, but across so many different avenues, with so many different people on executive level, on the mid-tier level, and on the lab level, it sounds like just such a good training experience, and you get to learn and do a lot of things at the same time.
Yeah, it's really been great. I've been so lucky and so grateful to have found this job, and my team is like my family now. I can't complain.
That's perfect. That's perfect. So now that you've been with the company for I guess about what is it, like 7 months, 6, 7,
Yeah, I
8
started
months?
in September, so 8 months now.
Okay, so now that you had some experience working there, you find yourself in the midst of a pandemic. So what was going on through your head in terms of maybe your job security, career trajectory? Like, how does that really affect what you had to do on a day-to-day basis?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was again pretty lucky in that a lot of what I can do remotely. It's not ideal, but I've been able to make it work remotely. A lot of it is emails, conference meetings through Zoom or phone calls, and a lot of it is writing reports. We have various types of software, Slack, project management software where we can, manage all of the projects in real time. So that's been really helpful. And as far as job security, we definitely had a meeting about it when all this was happening. And we've been very fortunate to secure enough funding to where no one was, no one's job was compromised. We were all able, even the lab staff that, have to actually do the work in the lab, we were able to find work for them to do remotely, since a lot of the work we do is virtual. We've been able to adapt pretty well, I think. So it's been weird because, we work with a lot of other institutions and companies that they might not necessarily be operating right now. So a lot of the studies that we usually have incoming have decreased, but then we have an increase in other types of projects that are mostly virtual, which is really helpful for us. So
yeah,
it's been not too bad.
that's very good. The last thing you want is to actually worry about things like job security after you got your job, right? I think that nobody wants to be in that position. So in terms of the application scientist position that you have, you said you're basically the first and only application scientist in the company. So how does that make you feel in terms of the learning curve, or the big shoes that you need to fill, or these big the top brass that you need to satisfy, and like what's going on through your like fresh out of PhD program right into this type of big boys game or something like that? Like is it challenging? How did you really adjust to just changing your mindset and things like that?
It was definitely scary at first because I had no industry experience. I was being hired. I didn't do a postdoc. I was being hired. Obviously they knew that, and I was worried about what kind of expectations they would have. But in the beginning, everyone that I worked with was so helpful and just very understanding that I just literally just got my PhD a couple months ago. They just needed someone to help in these areas, and anything that I could do would be helpful. And I kind of got thrown into it. So I just kind of, a lot of what we do is pathology and histology, and I had a vague understanding of a lot of those methods, but I was just kind of thrown into it where, after a couple weeks, I needed to know everything that we did.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of the best way to learn, really. It was something that was all very interesting to me, and so I was able to kind of pick it up really well. And there was definitely a steep learning curve, but everyone was very understanding of who I was and my experience, and really appreciated what I brought to the table, nonetheless. So
Yeah,
it was kind of scary starting your first job out of your PhD, but it was, if you find the right job, then so
yeah.
it was
Yeah, that's really nice to hear. And going back to our conversation earlier about failures, do you feel like you had some, I guess, missteps of failures along the way in those first a month or couple of weeks? And how did you really use your PhD training to overcome that?
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely set high expectations for myself, which I should have known, I should not do. So anytime I would make a mistake or something, I would kind of, take it in and internalize it, when really I should just ask for help, and it wasn't a big deal. I would always make a big deal of it in my head, but it really wasn't, because I could just go to someone and be like, hey, I accidentally did this. Can you help me figure it out? And it wasn't a big deal at the end of the day.
That's good.
So I definitely kind of learned that I still make mistakes to this day every now and then, but I know how to handle them better, because I'm on a team now, which is kind of different coming from your PhD. You're very much independent. Everything's kind of on you. You are responsible for your success, whereas I'm on a team now. It's not just me. If I am struggling with something, or if I'm feeling overwhelmed, I can go to a handful of people, and they will help me, and it's not going to make me look weak, or make me look like I can't do my job. It's all such a very supportive environment, and that's been the main difference that's helped.
Yeah. What's the secret sauce of getting hired? What did you have to demonstrate to them to get into such a, position that you're in? I think you can't just say, oh, I'm good with science communication. What was the rationale behind them saying Marisa can do that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I wish I had the answer for everybody, but it's definitely different for everyone. And I think it was just getting the interview. I knew that if I could just get an interview with someone, I can, make my case. I can sell, myself and my story, how I needed to do that. So I hadn't really gotten that many interviews, and it was really just the timing was right. I did find this job on LinkedIn, so a great platform to reach out to people. And someone reached out to me about this job months ago, and I hadn't even seen their message. And then finally, maybe in August, I had seen this message, and was like, oh, it looks like they're still hiring for this position. Maybe I'll give it a shot. And it worked out. And so it was really landing the interview that made the difference, because I did have to do a 30-minute presentation on something on my previous experience, but focus on the pathology aspects of it, which I didn't have a lot of my previous work that involved a lot of pathology. So I kind of had to, rework that a little bit, but it was really just giving a good presentation. I think that made all of the difference, because now when I sit in interviews, you can tell very easily from a person's presentation how they communicate, how they think about things. And I think that's really, depending on the job, that's a really big benefit, depending on, if it's your strength or your weakness. So I think if you are lucky enough to get an interview and the opportunity to do a presentation, I think that's really where you can shine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So from the altitude that you're in right now, which is, having this position for a while, having made that jump, which is the almost sacred jump for a lot of scientists from academia to the industry, and looking back down into the valley of failures through undergrad and grad school, what was the biggest thing that you feel proud of in terms of what you've done? And what do you think would be the best advice to give to your younger self that was looking up on that mountain?
Yeah, I think I would be most proud of my perseverance, not giving up, because there were plenty of times when I wanted to, um, and I think knowing now what I know, I think to tell, people starting their PhD or still in their PhD, it's not impossible to make the jump. It will happen. You just have to keep persevering and working hard, and it's just going to be, you know, I kind of believe that everything happens for a reason, and it's there is some luck involved, but if you just keep trying and keep persevering, I think that you will get there. You will.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great advice. But perseverance can only be as good as maybe the work-life balance. So maybe one of the last questions I want to ask is, how did your work-life balance change from graduate school to what you have to do in the industry? Like, do you feel like you still have that work-life balance? Which one is harder, grad school or industry work?
Oh gosh, grad school is so much harder. Don't get me wrong. My days when I was in the office and even now are busy all day. I am definitely busy. It's a very like fast-paced environment, but it's all really interesting, and I get to work with a lot of really great people. So it's not exhausting. It's not it doesn't weigh down on you the way nonstop working through a PhD does. I think when I was doing my PhD, there was very little work-life balance, and I knew that my next job, I needed that, because I was burnt out so fast within my PhD, and I'm sure everybody is, after, gosh, probably like a year.
Yeah, you get third degree burns that never really heal.
Yeah, exactly. And even, when I started my industry job, I was shocked that like I could leave at like 5 p.m. Like it was, I still to this day, well, I don't go in the office now, because of the pandemic, but when I was still in the office, I would still feel guilty when I left at 5 p.m. when it's like, nobody cared that I left when I was supposed to.
Yeah.
And if I wanted to leave a little bit early, it was also fine.
Yeah.
And if it's great. It's just been really nice. I don't have to work on weekends. Like I almost never work on weekends, which was in my PhD, I was always working on weekends. So it's definitely a healthier lifestyle for sure.
That's very good. And I guess it gives you some opportunity to also continue doing the self-reflection. So in the PhD, we have ultimate goal of getting to the finish line and getting the PhD. In the job that you have, like, what does that translate into? What's the next frontier that you're trying to get to?
That's a good question. And actually being in this position has like really kind of helped me figure out what I want to do in my, this new trajectory, and something I maybe never would have thought of during my PhD because I just didn't know. But I really do like working with people and communicating science to people, and kind of spreading the mission of like our company. And I could see myself kind of moving up in that way throughout different biotech companies, maybe becoming a project manager or a lead application scientist at some point, potentially even the CSO of a company one day, something along those lines, where I get to work with the science in kind of a big picture aspect, but also share it with people, and help kind of build the company that way. So still don't know what that exactly looks like, but I think it's where I am now. I feel like I'm in a good place to kind of try different things.
I think it's kind of akin to doing a PhD. Like you have a vague idea of what that would look like, and you definitely want to take all the necessary steps and put in the hard work. But it's okay to not exactly know what your thesis would look like.
Yeah, because you don't. And at the end of the day, it's going to work out the way it was supposed to.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much, Marisa, for taking the time to speak with me today. It was absolutely fun.
Of course. Pleasure. It was all mine.
Thank you.